everybody. Welcome to our Circle of Trust podcast, where our goal is to empower you by giving you access to precise knowledge about the latest technology, innovation and trends. At Circle of Trust, we also give you access to a trusted network of validated advisors. Today, I'm delighted that we've got Katie Ireland, CEO of Enliven, here with us today. I'm going to let Katie tell you all the details about Enliven, but I just wanted to share you a little bit about the technology. I find it really amazing. They've created this virtual reality platform, which is all about helping individuals and organizations understand the experiences of others by immersing people into simulations that recreate experiences of discrimination, bias, or some sort of trauma. This really allows people to be in the shoes of somebody else and sort of get a feeling of that empathy. And by having some empathy towards other people, we can sort of understand a little bit of their struggles and potentially look at solutions in the workplace. So I'm excited to talk to Katie and hear more about the technology. Now, it's quite funny because on my very first podcast that I did with Circle of Trust, I happened to mention the Enliven technology. I didn't know what it was called or anything about them. And then I think it was about 4 or 5 months later, I bumped into Katie on a busy train in Amsterdam, and we'd both been to the Next Web conference. And luckily for me, she was wearing her badge and somebody else had talked about her. So I was like, Katie Ireland, and I sort of introduced myself and, had a moment of should I, because she's probably tired after a long day, and then thought, it's all about connecting and networking with people. So I did. And so I'm really pleased to have Katie and join us as a guest for our podcast today. Before I get on with the podcast, I have one other little quick comment to make. And for those of you who are regulars to the podcast, you may notice that our host is a little different today. So today we have a really special co-host, and we have Eve Longanova Parker. Eve is the CEO of Evenness. Circle of Trust is part of Evenness, and I thought it'd be great to have two CEOs on our show today just to add that extra dynamic. Though Eve is going to be sort of co-hosting with me, there are some questions that I think, given the fact I have two CEOs and two female CEOs, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to have both of you answer some of the questions. To kick off our podcast, my first question is to Katie and Eve. I'd love to ask you both to introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little bit about who you are and your journey.
Thank you for the intro and mentioning the story of how we met. I was chuckling because I had felt like a right Wally sitting on the train, still having my lanyard on because I hadn't taken it off, and yet it turned into a perfect moment of connection. So that was very sort of serendipitous, I thought. So hi everyone, I'm Katie and I'm the CEO of Enliven. I joined at the beginning of this year after almost 20 years in the corporate world in STEM and marketing roles. And I think during my corporate experience, I really saw firsthand some of the challenges that were being faced in terms of increasing amount of burnout, feelings of not belonging and being able to speak up, plenty of examples of bias. And really, it was always driving me to say, how can we change the way we do things? How can I be a better leader, a better colleague? How can we connect in a more meaningful way? So this led me to do lots of sort of extracurricular things. So alongside my corporate career, I trained as a personal trainer first because I wanted to help people lead healthier and happier lives. And also I was paying a lot of money for my personal trainer in a central London gym at the time. And that really taught me that actually I could study and do things alongside my corporate job. So then that led on to doing a master's in positive psychology and coaching psychology, becoming a mental health first aider. And more recently, I trained as a somatic coach because I'm a big believer in sort of full body, anything really, full body leadership, this notion that we're not just walking heads. We're a full person. So now I incorporate that into my coaching. But I would say really to define myself, I like to be a bit of a disruptor. having spent my career within analytics, I was usually brought in to change things up, to change the status quo, to adapt the way we were working. And that has really grown, initially doing that within the STEM space, but now doing that within the DE and I space. So I made the somewhat wild step to leave the corporate world and to join Enliven as a startup. Alex Tavasoli, he is the original founder, now CPO, and I was really inspired by his story. So he started the company a few years ago. Sadly, having experienced domestic violence in the home himself, he was really triggered to create our first experience, which is domestic violence from the point of view of the child. So a very powerful and strong experience. We also have experiences on knife crime, bullying in schools, intellectual disability, and sort of started more in the healthcare and education space. Now we're moving into the corporate space, and I'll certainly talk about that more as we go through. But I think thinking about my particular journey, I'm mindful that I am both part of marginalised communities and also deeply privileged. So I was really inspired to use whatever privilege I had, whatever spaces and stages I was given, to really use my voice to support others. And that's what we try and do at Enliven. We want to take the burden away from the marginalised groups who often have to share their stories at personal cost to themselves. And we use the technology to tell the stories of others and drive positive change so that we can reduce unwanted behaviours and the biases which are sadly very prevalent in today's society and therefore in our workplace.
Thank you, Katie. Sounds like an interesting. I'm sure we could dip into a lot of those topics. I can imagine. Eve, can I ask you to introduce yourself as well, please, and tell us a little bit about your journey?
Hi, everyone. I'm very thrilled to be here today. And Katie, what a pleasure to meet you in person. Well, virtually, but almost like in person. Not on the train, but in the metaverse space. I'm Eve Luganova-Parker, founder and CEO of Evenness, a Web3 AI and metaverse startup specializing in making innovation sustainable, accessible, and inclusive with the power of emerging and frontier technology. My career started many years ago. I spent first 15 years working in the corporate world with innovation labs, helping to launch innovative solutions in the emerging, developing, and developed markets. Among those solutions were Watson supercomputer by IBM, various forms of artificial intelligence, robotics, payment screens for autonomous driving cars. A lot of cool things that made me fall in love with innovation again and again. Today, I'm a startup founder specializing in frontier tech and emerging tech solutions and working with businesses and organizations to create value that goes beyond the bottom line. At Evenness, our diverse team of ethical innovators is dedicated to harnessing artificial intelligence, blockchain, digital twins, and extended reality to empower communities, accelerate sustainable and inclusive innovation, and enable every individual to have a thriving chance in life.
A big plus one to everything you've just said there in terms of profit and mission. And we too are a very mission-focused company. And where we're focused is we believe that if you understand what it feels like to be bullied or to experience racism or gender bias, then you're one step closer to the solution. And so that's exactly what we try to do. Using the power of VR, we put you into the shoes of somebody else to give you a flavour of, just for a short moment, what that is like, with the belief that if you feel it, you're more likely to change your behaviour. We couple this with a mobile app, with a training course that takes you through step by step on your empathy journey. And I talk about empathy a lot. This is really at the core of what we're trying to do at Enliven. We're tackling some key diversity, equity and inclusion topics, but the umbrella concept is really around how do we grow our empathy muscle? And yes, I do see it as a muscle, as something that can be strengthened, just like any muscle. And it's important because we want to tap in people's parts to change their mind. So moving from awareness to action.
I love what you just said about, sort of championing the voice of the person as well, as part of what you were talking about. And also the concept of building this empathy muscle that we can do. And I think you perhaps mentioned this a little bit, but just to drill in a little bit more, how does that VR technology really enhance the empathy and understanding? Sort of, in the past, people might have done an unconscious bias training or a workshop or something like that. But how does the VR technology sort of really push the buttons, if you will?
Yes, we think the VR is like the fire that ignites something special here. So most training, you mentioned unconscious bias, most training is done typically online. It's very often a mandatory training. You have to do it. It's, tick the box and move forward. The VR creates something very special in that it's different, in that it's new, it's fun, people are curious, they want to play. We get new people into the room that otherwise wouldn't be there. In my experience with this sort of training, it's usually the same people every time that put their hand up, they're passionate about it, they're allies, and they're doing the training. We want to talk to the silent majority who perhaps don't normally engage with the DE&I groups or haven't experienced it themselves, and tap into that curiosity. Come on down, give it a try, and that starts the conversation. But I think most importantly, and this links to sort of my training from a somatic perspective, is that we're doing more than the cognitive. So most other training, in fact, the majority of psychology focuses only on the brain. This notion that if we know better, we'll do better. And that is true to some extent. But we are talking about big fundamental shifts in society and in the workplace. And I don't think the head alone is enough. We need to tap into people's hearts as well as their minds and create this want to change, this desire to change. And I think VR is very powerful to do that. It's that curiosity hook, and then it's that powerful emotion. And we hear that when people take the headset off, I get a range of responses, and therein lies the beauty. But very often for the group perhaps who are brand new to the topic, it's just this moment of, oh, now I get it. And that for me is the starting point. Then we can have the conversation, then we can explore, then they've opened up and they're ready.
Makes total sense, having that balance and safety so that people feel comfortable. And I quite like the idea of being able to up or down. And also, I think, especially in the corporate environment, from all of us have had experience of little microaggressions. You're not really sure what actually happened, but you felt something. Sort of tapping into that is also key.
And that can be really hard for all of us, because often the intent is good. But we're all on this learning journey, even when we're part of the group. I'm mindful I'm a woman, but that doesn't stop me from causing microaggressions based on the patriarchy. We live in a patriarchal society. Therefore, the workplace is going to bring that in. We all need to unlearn as much as we need to learn. And it can be tricky. It can feel uncomfortable. And I'm totally okay with that. This is not designed to be self-improvement work, tick box. This is designed to be uncomfortable so that we can lift everyone up, not just the people who look and sound like us.
Yeah, it's that linking it to your actual feeling rather than just that thought process that this could happen, and then having the emotions sort of tightly linked with what they're being seen can. And as soon as you can have a feeling about what somebody else is going through, whether it's a male or a female or somebody of color or whatever, the situation, as soon as you get that feeling, that empathy sort of starts to build, and then you can think of what to do with that. I'm curious though, how do you strike that sort of balance between creating realistic and impactful experiences without sort of really causing so much stress and trauma for the person who's part of this workshop or experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say, like most things, the answer is consent. within our app, we include an element where we say you can choose to opt out of the VR. So perhaps you want to do the training, but on that given day, you say, actually, I don't feel okay to experience that. That is no problem. You can make that choice. Then we signpost where help can be found, and then you can carry on with the course. Likewise, if you do go through the training, throughout the app, we link to signposting for a given organisation's employee assistance programme or other more generalised places where support can be found. Importantly, all our scenarios are built with experts. So we have an expert panel on a given topic to make sure that we are accurately representing the situation that we're talking through. And it's been a debate for us, actually, because some people have said, oh, I think you could go stronger. I think you could go stronger on this one and really shock people. Certainly we can, and some of our scenarios are indeed more overt. But where we've been moving increasingly, I would say, within the corporate space is focusing more on the subtle things and the microaggressions. Because I think, if we take bullying, which is more overt, then there is very little debate. When something's really overt, or in the topic of sexual harassment, when it's really overt, nobody is debating it. But there is a lot of debate once we get into the more subtle things, the microaggressions. And I think it is important to call these out, particularly in an environment where it's not personal to a real person. This is a VR scenario. So we can have that debate without it being, without it dismissing the feelings that people might have who have experienced that. But a balance is the right word, because we constantly sort of go back and forth. And I think we will continue to play with that. And I see a future where we have different levels. How extreme do I want this experience to be? And we can go a bit further, but it is never our goal to re-traumatize, which is why consent is key, because the reality is we never know what might trigger others. And equally, we never know what might trigger ourselves on a given day. And so we create that safety around things so that the support is there in case something does emerge.
In these, while you've been developing these sort of VR scenarios and things, are there any ones that really you found challenging or particularly eye-opening that you'd not thought about or anything like that?
It is challenging. It's certainly not easy. I think the first challenge is the tech. So VR is both our USP and our barrier to entry and barrier to scale. Now, we absolutely see a world where on your first day of work, you would get your headset alongside your laptop, and VR or some form of spatial web is part of your job. We're not there yet. We're a long way from that. And what we're seeing is our clients have varying levels of comfort with VR. Some companies are already heavily using it for their training needs. For other companies, it's about helping them get started. So the way we overcome that is, as part of our package, we've got sort of an intro setup package. We can help people get started with VR, facilitate the setting up of the headsets, taking away any challenges involved in that. We're also exploring how we utilize other technology to complement it. So the VR is still, as I said earlier, it's the fire. It's the thing that ignites. It's the thing that encourages people. But now that we've got our app, which is sort of the training complement, there's a lot more we can do within that in terms of the training and the development and engaging others. So within our app, we have training information, we have empathy enhancers to try and encourage people to check in regularly. So we're exploring all of that, and it won't surprise you to know that we're looking as to how we can include a greater amount of AI in terms of the learning content. I mean, who isn't looking at that at the moment? So more to come on that space. I think additionally, there's another challenge, which is really the work on DE&I. So what I've seen from my corporate experience is that even in large, very successful organizations, there aren't necessarily large diversity, equity and inclusion budgets yet. So we have this challenge that some organizations perhaps haven't really focused on it yet. So there's no champion within the business, if you will. Some organizations do have a champion, but yet they've not empowered sometimes a very senior champion with a team, with a budget. And so within there, we're having to be creative in terms of the way we go in. And it also links to this sort of question as to, do we even need DE&I roles within an organization? My answer would be yes, we do today. But I hope that in the future, we shouldn't need it, because every leader should be a DE&I advocate. And that's really where we're going with this. So we often connect with leaders to demonstrate the power of empathy for any leadership position. I don't see our training as a nice to have or something only for the employee resource groups or for allies. I see empathy as a key skill for the future of leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I don't just mean those at the top of the hierarchy. I mean everyone at every level of the organization. We need empathy in order to connect with one another. I mean, empathy is at the heart of human connection, and human connection is the heart of everything, whether in the workplace or anywhere else. So that's that's another challenge that we're trying to navigate, where to land in the organization to truly get traction, and how to use the champions that we've got.
Well, as we are talking about inclusion, I have a question regarding VR inclusion and accessibility. For many, VR headsets are unaffordable, with options like the Apple Vision Pro priced at over $3,000 and the Quest 2 at $400. Are there any other challenges you see that make VR inaccessible and thus slow down adoption?
Yes, I absolutely see challenges. I think the challenge is we're trying to be an inclusive. We're centered on inclusivity, but VR is not inclusive yet. And I hope maybe one day it will be when the technology improves. But we know that it's not inexpensive. So that's a barrier. It hasn't been built yet for people with visual impairments, or at least I haven't seen enough developments in that space. We do focus on how can we build our experiences to enable for people perhaps of different heights or standing versus sitting to accommodate. How might people navigate the experience if in a wheelchair? Does that still work? What are the requirements there? But I guess the answer is VR is not yet an inclusive technology. We're using it to try and drive more inclusivity, but there's definitely more thought that needs to go into all of our experiences and the technology itself to see how can we open it up and make it more inclusive. And that's where I think we need to work together, because we alone are not going to have all these answers. I think there are so many companies within this space that are trying to drive adoption, explore what's possible. And I think by coming together, this notion of collaboration versus competition, if we can do that, then we might have a hope of opening it up and making the technology more inclusive than it is today.
These are very wise words, Katie. I loved hearing you mention collaboration, not competition. Speaking of collaborators and partners of Enliven, could you please share a few names of your supporters?
I must give a big shout out to Microsoft initially. They have been our pioneering partner. We launched with them back in March. We're working with their women's network to launch our gender bias simulation. So we launched that back for International Women's Day back in March. And we're also part of their startup accelerator program for those trying to do social good. So they've been sort of our pioneer. We're also doing work. It's Diversity Day coming up, and so we quite often do large-scale demos where we're there for a portion of the day, and we invite as many people as possible to come down and try one of our experiences. So we've done that with KPN, and we've got Rabobank, coming up. We're in talks with a lot of big companies, so Google, and we were actually the benefactor of one of their grants some years ago. So they've been a big champion of what we're trying to do. We're talking to ASML, Deloitte, EY, RTL and Talpa and NPO. Anyone listening in the Netherlands will know there's been a lot of chat within the media around sexual harassment. So that's a big topic in that space. We've done work with the Dutch Department of Justice that was particularly focused on domestic violence simulation, working with the Dutch police force and a number of universities within the Netherlands and healthcare companies. So I could go on. There's sort of a long list, and you're right. There is a queue. We are very lucky that many people are getting in touch with us. They're hearing about us through various channels, and they're curious to know more. Our view is really that where there are humans, there is a need for more empathy, and where there is a need for more empathy, there is a role for Enliven. So we want to be in all spaces, all places. We're very focused on the corporate space at the moment, but equally still partnering with our clients within the education space and the healthcare space, for example. And really, it just grows. We're focusing more on the Netherlands initially because that's where we're based, but we see a huge opportunity within all markets and all countries. I think everyone would appreciate a little more empathy within the workplace, so we'd love to help grow that.
Katie, as part of some of these stories that you've been telling, I can imagine that there's a huge part of creating some of these simulations. Part of it is storytelling. Can you tell us a little bit about how this storytelling sort of contributes to the effectiveness of building that empathy?
I mentioned already that we partner with experts, so we get lots of points of view in terms of a specific topic and different examples of the specific bias that we're working on. We then write the scripts ourselves, and then we work with actors, and we go into the studio using mocap. It's not the cheapest way to create VR, but it is the most immersive. We create experiences that have multiple characters, which enable you to be in an experience and interact a bit more, explore, move around, experience multiple different scenarios within one space. And that for us is deliberate. We have a big focus on immersion because we want to tap into that feeling. As I said, we want to get people out of their heads, into their hearts, into their bodies. There are so many stories to tell, so that can be challenging. And of course, every time we create a new experience, people always say, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And that's why we need to stay here and create experience after experience and the different nuance. And I'll give one example. Our gender bias scenario is a very important one. It talks about Nala. She comes back from maternity leave, and she is really sort of marginalised and not introduced and treated differently and assumed that her priorities have changed, etc. Something that I'm sure many people that have been on maternity leave can identify with. But equally, I also don't want to be reductive and say, well, all women experience that, because I know that there are many women who can't have children, who don't want to have children, and or simply that, that's not their journey. And there are many more gender biases that we could talk about. So this is always the challenge. We've picked one because we know it impacts lots of women, but equally, I don't want to be reductive and say, tick box, we've done gender bias now. It's important that we take all these elements, and that's why we will continue to grow and improve and build upon our content library. And the reason we focus on storytelling, I think, so strongly is because really it's my belief that that's how we engage as humans. I think most of us grew up hearing stories, whether we were fortunate enough that our parents read to us before bedtime, or we had the joy of reading. It's how we connect. I think very often, when you're listening to someone, if they just give you sort of information, it may go in. I find my brain's not as good as remembering things, but if someone tells me a story, I'm much more likely to retain that information. So we deliberately create stories in which we center the user in them to create not only the feeling, but the memory of that feeling that lasts beyond the training. And from there, that's where we can build.
Katie, as stories are different, what topics do you find the hardest to translate into VR stories and create experiences around?
Domestic violence is always going to be one of the absolute toughest. It is a very difficult topic, however you approach it. But I think what I'll call out is sexual harassment. That's one of the recent experiences we created, our newest one. And that was challenging to get in the VR because we were focusing on subtle elements. So within VR, it's really easy to show the overt, but we deliberately didn't want to do that. We wanted to focus on the more subtle things. So then we really had to think, how do we convey this? Is this strong enough that the person experiences it, but not so strong that we've lost this notion of the microaggression? And so that is really where we were focusing. And I mentioned we do debate this. But it's not just actually within the VR scenarios. It's come through in the training. I've had pushback from the training that I've written in terms of, well, does this exist? Is this proven? All of these sorts of things. And absolutely all the training, the sources are there. I mean, I have an academic background, so I'm very used to backing up my sources. And indeed, my work within analytics is, there's a lot of sort of proof points there. But nonetheless, these things are still being challenged. And so therefore the whole process becomes almost a dance between how do we really land this sufficiently without overdoing it, without traumatizing, but also without having the impact. But equally, we don't shy away from having a difficult conversation. So within some of the training, I have had pushback to say, well, I think this is debatable. Great. Let's have that debate. I'm not going to change the training. I'm not going to soften it. As I say, this is not about ticking a box so that you can go away and feel good and say, I'm now, I'm a good person. No, this is the hard work to unlearn, to reduce our biases. And if you don't agree with something I've said, that's where the magic happens. Then we can have a discussion. Okay, tell me more about your point of view, your experiences. Great. Let's hear from someone else. What are their experiences? What can we learn from that? So yes, it can be awkward at times, but this work needs to be awkward. It needs to be uncomfortable, I think, in order to make the change that we need to see.
Yeah, I can imagine that, sometimes those are uncomfortable conversations. And I imagine that sometimes people don't want to believe these things exist. Ignorance is bliss sometimes, and having to deal with some of these uncomfortable topics is quite tricky.
It is a tricky one. And I think that's where the VR can be powerful, by focusing on the feeling, because then it naturally lives on longer than we would typically see with sort of a standard online course. But even that's not enough. So what we've been focusing on, I mentioned it briefly earlier, these empathy enhancers, if you will, this notion that it is a muscle and we need to continually use it. But equally, giving ourselves space when it wastes. So we know when looking at mental health, if we ourselves are not feeling our best, we're, feeling very pressured, it's hard to find that extra empathy. That's okay, as long as we're aware of it and we're sort of constantly on this journey to look after ourselves and show up for others. It's about engaging and connecting with this notion of, okay, I have an empathy muscle and I want it to be as strong as it can be at any given time. So the way we do that is we've got the VR experiences, and then we've got the full training experience via the app as well, which explains more around what the person has just seen within the app. So the biases, we specifically call out and explain what they are, why it might be problematic. We encourage reflection, for people to write things down or discuss them if they're in the training room. We're also exploring in future developments how we can include regular sort of notifications, quizzes, personalized offering based on these are my particular topics, these are the areas that I want to strengthen my empathy muscle in, and then we can provide other resources, other examples of how to grow your empathy muscle. But it's an ongoing commitment. I think that's it. This is no small thing we're trying to do it, and I've mentioned this a number of times on this podcast, so I can't sort of stress it enough. The society we live in is inherently biased. So we are working against messages that we are seeing all day, every day. And therefore, it's not one thing that's going to change it. What we're really looking to do is ignite a commitment, ignite a want to change. And then we're exploring lots of different ways to try and engage people and do so on a personalized basis. So the individual can find the way that works most for them, whether it's podcasts, whether it's videos, whether it's reading books, however they learn most effectively.
So the last few questions I have are for both you and Eve, actually, sort of with your hat as CEOs of startups. My first question is that, do you envisage the future of VR technology, and what's that potential for it to create that positive social change?
Yeah, well, I think for me, this links to sort of how we started before we were recording. So listeners won't know that we had some sort of fun and games getting into the room, and I loved it. Not the tech issues, but once we were in, it was so exciting. These things are new. I'm a big supporter of play within the workplace, particularly as a grown-up. We think we're not supposed to do it, but yet animals continue to play, and evolution hasn't squashed it. So I believe it's important. And therein lies the opportunity. This is new. This is fun. We can play within VR. We can role play. We can make mistakes. We can practice. We can improve. We can start again. It just feels like the possibilities are endless. And I don't want the sort of the spatial web or Web3, whatever we're calling it, to be a replica of the world we have. We've got the opportunity instead to try something new and to play with it and get it wrong and give ourselves permission to do that without perhaps the repercussions that we see elsewhere, with all the adequate safety elements, which I know are not there. But it's this notion of how might we enjoy ourselves and play and connect if we weren't so frightened of the consequences.
You are absolutely right. Many grown-up professionals lack the opportunity for a playful work setup, and that is unfortunate. However, I firmly believe that Evenness is on a mission to change that. After 2 years of intensive research on how to facilitate cross-border innovation sustainably, accessibly, and inclusively, we've discovered that there are numerous metaverse places designed for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, where you navigate as avatars, complete quests, and collect tokens. We tested this approach with Gen X and Millennials, and their response was, "Is that it?" It's fun for 15 minutes, but I am too busy at work, supporting my family. Online games are now for my kids. So this realization led us to challenge the status quo and introduce what we call functionality into the workplace. At Evenness, we provide space where people can meet as avatars, collaborate, brainstorm, prototype, build, and test solutions on a global scale. That's where InnoCity X comes in, a global immersive hub for smart cities, ESG-driven businesses, tech communities, and innovators. We promote net zero solutions, upskilling, and hands-on innovation. And our goal is to bridge the digital divide, inspire society focused on sustainability, and nurture a green economy of scale. We do this by fostering collaboration, experimentation, and solution crowd testing. This approach, I believe, addresses the most pressing challenges of our time, including access to education, tech inclusion, digital literacy, and safeguarding our planet from climate change through sustainable practices. So, Hina, yes, these, I think, are the key trends that I see where artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, and Web3 can actually become the right tools to enable the change.
Katie, what advice would you give to, I'm sure there's sort of the, sort of entrepreneurs and startups out there listening to this podcast. So what kind of advice would you give to people who are going through their startup or starting to build or sort of a little bit further down their journey?
This is an interesting one. I did a talk on something similar to this actually at the Next Web where we met. It's sort of my early reflections, and I came up with sort of 4 key. I'm reluctant to call them bits of advice because I'm kind of like, who am I to give any advice? But these are sort of my learnings that maybe will help other people. The first is really define your why, and connected to Simon Sinek, who I'm sure many of the listeners know. I don't mean society's why or your partner's why, your parents' why, anything like that. But what really drives you? I think that's important within the startup space. It is hard work. It will stretch you, and therefore it must be connected to something that's important. It cannot be just a soulless pursuit of money, unless that is your why. It's not my why, but if it is, no judgment there, but it needs to be connected to whatever it is that drives you. The second one is something that I use within my coaching very often as well, which is around just keep taking that next first step. So when I introduced myself at the beginning, I mentioned that I trained as a personal trainer. Now, the reason I'm sat here today is because I went to an information evening about becoming a gym instructor. That's the level even before the personal trainer. That seems completely unrelated, but that then led to me doing the personal training qualification, which showed me that I could study alongside a corporate job, which led me to doing the masters, which led me to coaching part-time, which led me to be brave enough to leave the startup world and do this. So it's always the next first step. And equally in a startup, you often don't have the answer because you're paving a new way. So just take the next first step and then the next first step and then see where you get. Number 3, critically important, find your tribe. Gosh, it is lonely. I found it really lonely, particularly coming from the corporate world where there are lots of people. And I've also found it very the opposite of diverse, shall we say. Very often I was the only woman in the room, just to give one example of diversity. And so therefore it's been really important for me to find people like yourselves today to connect, to share similar passions, and likewise reaching out. I've asked for coaches. One of the first words I said was help. Find people that have already done it or who've got different perspectives to help you. I think that's key. And the last one, which I'm absolutely terrible at, is let go. You can't control everything. I can't apply my corporate mindset and I am, to some extent, I am trying to put a bit of structure in. That's also why I was brought in. But for the most part, it's just about letting go. Say yes. If you can say yes and you want to say yes. See what happens and kind of let go. So those would be my thoughts there.
Love it. Thank you very much, Katie. Last question. We've sort of coming to the top of the hour for us. And so last question, Katie, is what technology developments are you most excited about at the moment? Because we know technology sort of moves at a rate of really great speed.
I think the thing that most inspired me that was just in the news recently was a lady called Anne Johnson, who had a stroke, I think, 18 years ago. And they've been able to develop a brain implant. And now she's able to communicate through a digital avatar and communicate with her, I think it was her husband, for the first time in 18 years. And for me, that's what gets me excited. It's not one element of technology, but it's about what that technology enables. Anything that enables us to better connect with ourselves and with others is exciting. So when I think about VR, when I think about the spatial web, for me, yes, and AI as well, I am scared because I can see how powerful it could be if in the wrong hands. But equally, I am excited about the power of connection. How AI can be used for good, to cure cancer, to support people who need it, how we're using VR, for example, to try and drive positive change.
That whole thing of connection and new technologies that are allowing us to do that is really quite exciting. Eve, can I ask you the same question?
Every day there's something new coming to the market. The solutions based off generative AI capabilities, Web3, blockchain, Internet of Things, quantum even computing. It's all fascinating to me because that's how we not only envision the progress, we're actually building that progress every day by experimenting, by trying things, by collaboratively joining forces to find a better new solution to the human-made errors or the challenges that we're experiencing. But what excites me the most is what we're actually building at Evenness. It's Inner City X and it's Circle of Trust. Circle of Trust is our virtual community for senior executives and vetted Web3 experts. And we are launching very soon our app. We've been experimenting with artificial intelligence in its conversational AI form for knowledge management, knowledge sharing, for people who are always on the go. They don't have time for 40 hours of Coursera, but they need the answers right here, right now, because they are the heads of divisions. They are leading the companies into Web3, Web4, Web5, whatever else comes after. And they also need talent around them, consultants, supporters to enable this transition into the new form of work and collaboration and development. So therefore, I'm so very excited about what we're building at Evenness, making this change possible, supporting all those individuals, creators, business leaders in their way forward towards resilience, towards inclusion, towards efficiency. Stay tuned for the announcement. I only can say that right now, but that whole thing of bringing AI, Web3 and Metaverse together just really, really excites me. And I hope I could share this joy from our experiments at Evenness and our innovation curve with everyone else out there.
I'd just like to say thank you so much for agreeing to do this podcast. I've learned so much about Enliven, also about empathy, and also that sort of communication and how critical that is in our day-to-day lives and our corporate journeys and world. You know, without that, I think we're all a little bit of a loss, and anything that we can do to connect better and understand each other more and build this empathy muscle that you talked about would be a wonderful thing. Thank you so much for joining us today at this podcast. And I look forward to seeing you again at maybe another conference or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for this thought-provoking discussion. I really enjoyed this immersive podcast today.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here. I've had a lot of fun. And feel free for anyone who's interested to check us out online, on LinkedIn, etc. Would love to share more on Enliven to spread empathy a little further.